According to Elizabeth Diane Downs, she and her 3 children were shot by a strange man.
I never wanted to become something like that, something like her.
Mrs. Downs was wounded in the left arm and was able to drive the children to the hospital that night.
A part of me was afraid that that's where I came from. Does that mean where I'm going?
Christie was shot first. 3-year-old Danny was shot in the back. 7-year-old Cheryl was shot twice from behind and died on the way to the hospital.
And the fact that I felt some sort of a connection to her was terrifying.
Over the weekend, rumors began to fly about
We have not overlooked any possible suspects.
Reporters covering the story were getting hints that Downs herself was a suspect.
But what has occurred here is just inexcusable.
I knew I could never do something like that.
But at night, when I close my eyes, I can see Christie reaching her hand out to me while I'm driving. That haunts me the most.
Diane Downs was a case that captured the imagination and the horror of people at the time.
Law enforcement officials say they're waiting for Christie to remember what happened that night.
This is the kind of story you just never forget.
Another chapter in what's been a very unusual crime story.
And to really understand it, you have to go all the way back to 1983, when it all happened.
Let me go on.
America in 1983 still felt pretty innocent. Ronald Reagan was president. It's morning in America kind of notion. United States is a shining city on a hill.
It is Mrs. Reagan's interest in drugs which has helped fire up the president.
Nancy Reagan at the time had her own drug program.
Just say no.
Duran Duran had come out with a song that was very popular called Hungry Like the Wolf. And we went and bought an album that we played on a record player. You might remember those things.
Everybody was watching Dallas. That's the America that was unfolding at the time. Elizabeth Diane Downs made her star turn.
Diane Downs was a 27-year-old mother who had just moved up to Oregon from Chandler, Arizona. Her marriage to her high school sweetheart, Steve Downs, soured before she even left Arizona. And apparently that was because of her reported infidelity.
She was the mother of 3 children, ages 8, 7, and 3, Christie, Cheryl, and Danny. She was a postal worker.
Springfield was not nearly as sophisticated as Eugene. They're really twin cities, but it's more blue-collar.
I really like how Ann Rule introduces Eugene, Oregon and Springfield, Oregon in her book, Small Sacrifices. She says, Eugene, Oregon is the successful sister of the paired cities, cool, slender, professional. Her restaurants serve artichokes and ricotta pie. While Springfield, Oregon, half Eugene's size, is the sister who never graduated from high school, who no longer notices the acrid smell from logging.
I think Springfield sounds cliche, but a lot of people knew each other and you felt pretty safe there.
It really wasn't a scary place. I mean, they always say that when there's a murder or something, the neighbors always say something like that doesn't happen here. But of course it does. It was May 19th, 1983, when Diane took her children out to see a woman that she knew.
Diane didn't leave until about 9:30 at night. They leave from the friend's house. They're driving down the road. Christie remembers that Hungry Like the Wolf was playing.
And she took a detour to do some sightseeing.
Diane said a guy had flagged her car down. It was dark. And she had her 3 sleeping young kids in the car.
A bushy-haired stranger was waving his arms, and she said, of course. She stopped and asked him what seems to be the matter.
Supposedly, the man wanted her car, demanded her keys.
She said, "You've got to be kidding," at which time he pushed her aside began shooting the 3 kids.
And what she described next was this choreography where he fired one more bullet, hit her left arm.
She had pretended to throw the keys into the bushes, and as he was distracted, she jumped in the car and drove away.
She says at that point, she drove like a lunatic to the hospital.
She makes it to the hospital ER, driving even though she herself has been shot in the arm, bleeding.
She said, "Quick, my kids have been shot, come out."
I can only imagine the shock of everyone at the hospital when up rolls Diane Downs with 3 bloody children.
I talked to the nurses who were there that night, and they were crying. You know, the tears just started to run. I don't think they even realized it, talking about those little kids coming in all shot up.
Cheryl was dead, and Danny and Christie had both been shot and were badly wounded.
When I first walked into the ER, immediately they pointed me to Christie. When I looked at Christie, I thought she was dead. Her pupils were dilated. Her blood pressure was non-existent. And she is so close to death, it's unbelievable.
I got a phone call from dispatch, and I was told a mother and her children had been shot. When I got to the hospital, I was directed to interview the mother.
So I stopped and got out and asked him what was the problem. And he said, "I want your car." And I said, "You gotta be kidding. I mean, how many people really do that in real life? They don't."
Her demeanor was flat, not one tear, even though she knew that Cheryl had died.
I just kept saying, "God, do what's best. You know, if they gotta die, let them die, but don't let them suffer."
Her demeanor at the hospital did not conform to a traditional grieving mother whose children had just been shot, one murdered, the other 2 seriously clinging to life.
It was surreal.
When I was finished taking care of Christie, then I sought out her mother, and to my complete surprise, Diane was non-emotional, not a tear in her eye. And then she says, "That really ruined my new car. I got blood all over the back of it." I've never seen a reaction like that at all.
Thursday night, a man flagged down a woman and her 3 children on the road from Marcola to Springfield. Friday, the manhunt began in earnest.
Initially, there was panic. People in Oregon were like, "Oh my God, there is a crazy man on the loose who would gun down 3 small kids in a car. This is scary stuff."
People were locking their doors and they were feeling very unsafe. Kids weren't allowed to go out by themselves.
Mothers didn't go out in the evening, and they sure didn't take their children.
It became clear that the kids were gravely injured, and from what the police were indicating, they didn't have a lot to go on at that point.
There have been no sightings of either the suspect or his car.
Early on in the investigation, we did not have a suspect.
There is still an all-points bulletin out for the man.
Nor did we have a weapon.
Investigators found some spent cartridges by the roadside.
The only evidence we had were some casings that were found at the scene. We had divers in the river, but the gun was never found. We canvassed every home up and down, knocking on doors, asking if anyone had seen any suspicious individuals.
They came up with a composite, and that was circulated on every news station.
Elizabeth Downs says a shaggy-haired stranger shot at her.
Cops are racking their brains to try to put this case together.
We're going to do a videotape reenactment.
That's when they decide to do a reenactment.
I'm throwing the keys, okay? I'm throwing the keys.
Here is Mommy prancing around and telling jokes. Okay, that was a big red flag.